You are taking a live look right now from southern Lebanon there on your screen. Just days after this ceasefire began between Israel and Hezbollah, a Hamas delegation has reportedly traveled to Egypt for truce talks there. In the wake of the Israel-Hezbollah truce, President Biden said the U.S. would begin new efforts with Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey to restart talks for a ceasefire and a hostage release deal. Senator Lindsey Graham saying President-elect Donald Trump wants to see a Gaza ceasefire deal before he returns to the White House on January 20th. Graham spoke with Axios saying, quote, Trump is more determined than ever to release the hostages and supports a ceasefire that includes a hostage deal. He wants to see it happening now. The senator added, quote, I hope President Trump and the Biden administration will work together during that transition period to release the hostages and get a ceasefire. And again, we are taking a live look from southern Lebanon as that ceasefire does technically remain intact. However, we do have this post coming in from the Israel Defense Forces not too long ago, as they say the IDF is deployed in southern Lebanon and will actively enforce violations of the ceasefire agreement. We are told by the Israel War Room that there have been more violations here, as we've seen weapons that have been smuggled into Lebanon from Syria. As always, a lot to discuss here, so I do want to bring in Mark Chandler, Director of Government Relations and Professor of Practice at Coastal Carolina University. He's also a former senior defense intelligence official. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to be here with us early.
You're quite welcome, Josh, and good morning to you.
Good morning. Well, first off, I do want to talk about this Hamas delegation that is reportedly going over to Egypt to talk about these truce talks here. With this ceasefire that is in effect there in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah, I have to ask, does that open the door a little bit more for a ceasefire in Gaza, or is that still kind of up in the air?
Well, Josh, this is a very tenuous situation, but I do think we're seeing a possible breakthrough in negotiations with Hamas. You know, if we go back to the time mid-October when Israel killed Sinwar, there was a breakdown in communications inside Hamas, if you will, and then Hamas was taken out of Qatar and sent to Turkey. That's the best place they can operate as a leadership group there. So there's been a breakdown in the ability of Hamas to communicate internally. But what's really taken place now is that push from the U.S., Egypt, Qatar, and others. I think you're starting to see the pressure on Hamas, along with the successful Israeli military campaign, of starting to tell Hamas that time is up. So we're probably closer to a positive outcome in ceasefire negotiations. When we start to see some indications earlier this week, I even saw talk that Hamas was considering meeting Israel's demands of leaving forces in the Philadelphia corridor. If you remember a few months ago, that was a major sticking point where Hamas said there would be absolutely no Israeli military forces in the Philadelphia corridor. That's bordering Egypt and southern Gaza. And so you start to look at this, I think Hamas is starting to see the writing on the wall, especially that ceasefire you mentioned with Hezbollah, and then Iran kind of backing down a little bit, if you will, on what they're doing against Israel. So the two primary supporters for Hamas are starting to not necessarily be there and back Hamas as much. Now, with all things Middle East and all things Hamas, it's tenuous at best right now. And even if there is a ceasefire, Josh, I just want to caution everyone, it's going to be relatively short-lived. It could last a month. It could last a year or 2 years. Remember, Hamas has attacked Israel numerous times, 2014, 2021. So you start to see this, yes, positive now, but still there's a little bit of caution. And we have to see how they're going to play out the hostage release. You know, there's 101 Israeli citizens still held hostage there. Unfortunately, I would estimate there's probably less than 60 remaining alive.
And right now you're looking at this live look over southern Lebanon, but I want to take you back to the U.S. for this look at the White House, kind of expanding on what you were talking about there. We know President-elect Donald Trump reportedly wants this ceasefire in Gaza before he takes office January 20th. That is less than 2 months away. So is that a realistic possibility? You've said it is a possibility for the potential here for that ceasefire, but could it be by January 20th?
Well, when we look at the timing of these things, a ceasefire can go into effect relatively quickly, and it can fall apart just as fast as it goes into effect. I mean, your reporting earlier talked about the struggles in the ceasefire with Hezbollah up in the north. So I think you're going to see, some dynamics at play here that could put a ceasefire. How effective it is, I'm not sure at this point, but put a ceasefire into effect by January 20th. Remember, President-elect Trump has said that anyone holding hostages at that time, and there are still some American hostages there, when you start to look at that, he's kind of put Hamas on notice and its backers on notice. So they would like to reach a ceasefire to try to stop the fighting. Again, it's going to be tenuous at best. Lindsey Graham from South Carolina just took a second trip in a month to the Middle East to try to push this along with some of the Hamas backers. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we could see a ceasefire by January 20th.
As we talk a little bit more about the situation with Hamas, we know that they have claimed responsibility for that terror attack that happened a little more than 24 hours ago. Shots fired there at an Israeli bus. 8 people were injured in all, and that number could be even higher there. Hamas claiming responsibility, but those terror attacks are not rare. It seems as though they're happening more and more, and they have been happening for years, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think the West Bank is probably underreported and underappreciated for the terrorist hotbed that it really is. So when you look at that, and just a quick background, there is a struggle between a lot of Jewish settlers that go into the West Bank and set up enclaves, if you will, and then the Palestinians that are trying to control that. And this has been a historic struggle through 2 wars against the Arab states and Israel. So you look at that. However, inside refugee camps, there are numerous terror cells, whether it's Hamas terror cells or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They operate freely within those refugee camps inside the West Bank. As a matter of fact, in the March-April timeframe of this year, the IDF and Shin Bet, the Israeli security forces, had to go in force to try to weed out some of those terror cells of Hamas and the PIJ. So I look at that. They're constantly going to be attacking from the West Bank. This is nothing new. It's happened, year after year, month after month, over time from the West Bank. Just a week ago, a Palestinian took a construction vehicle, a very large truck, and rammed it into an Israeli civilian bus. So, and killed one. So you see this is going to happen, whether it's inspired or planned attacks from the West Bank. That will continue. And it's just something that people need to kind of keep in mind for the security situation there.
I want to pop up this post here coming in from the Israel War Room. We talked a little bit about the violations there of the ceasefire, the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire involving Hezbollah. And this post coming in not too long ago, they said Hezbollah violated the Lebanon ceasefire by smuggling weapons from Syria into Lebanon, prompting IDF airstrikes on military infrastructure near border crossings. So it is kind of important to note here that despite this ceasefire being in effect, there is still fighting, so to speak, that is going on, right?
Absolutely. And I think with this type of ceasefire, just so your viewers understand that the ceasefire is not going to eliminate all fighting at all. And obviously, Hezbollah is not acting in 100% true to form of the ceasefire agreement. And that smuggling operation that Israel hit, they've got good intelligence on how Iran is supplying weapons and munitions from Syria, through Syria, across those key crossing points into Lebanon. I mean, that's historic and has been going on for decades. So you look at that, Israel's obviously going to strike those and start to hit those back. I believe Israel took a lot of lessons from the 2006 war. That lasted about a month, and maybe 400 Hezbollah fighters were killed in that one. But this time, Israel has methodically gone in and taken out Hezbollah. They've killed, they say, about 2,500 fighters. I've seen the estimate as high as 4,000 Hezbollah fighters in the south. But different this time, Josh, is Israel went after the command and control and the leadership of Hezbollah. So they took out Nasrallah, which was a significant move, and they could have done it any time over the last 30 to 40 years. But they chose this war to take them out. But not just him. They've effectively decapitated the command and control across Hezbollah from senior leadership in the Shura Council all the way down to battalion, company, and division commanders. Every key leader that Hezbollah had in this war have been taken out. So that really puts Hezbollah kind of back on the ropes, if you will.
We've heard from Israeli officials who have said just recently that about 12,500 Hezbollah targets have been identified and destroyed, eliminated there as of the last 14 months. Of course, when we know the attacks by Hezbollah did start there on Israel after the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel, how significant would 12,500 targets be, as we don't necessarily know what those targets are? They are a variety of different things.
Well, I think that's a highly significant number, and it shows the fine operation between intelligence and the information that Israel's been gathering since the 2006 war that I talked about. But it also shows the extensive buildup that Hezbollah has had during that time. You know, Hezbollah took some lessons from that war as well. You know, they knew what Israel was going to attack back in 2006, so they started planning and building up a significant infrastructure. You know, the IDF has released limited video of the extensive tunnel network in southern Lebanon. But also, you look at how Hezbollah forward staged a lot of their munitions in those villages and civilian housing across southern Lebanon. So you look at that, and then you look at how Hezbollah set up its leadership areas in southern Beirut and then in the Bekaa Valley. So they had an extensive infrastructure. What Israel did through extensive intelligence and operational planning was to go in and identify all those key nodes, and then sometimes surgically, but sometimes in a significant ground or air campaign, remove those. I talked about removing the leadership. That was critical to the success of this Israeli operation. But also pushing back, when you talk about 12,500 targets, you know, you're talking about thousands of munitions, thousands of rocket launchers. You're talking about taking out that tunnel infrastructure in the south and all the fighting locations. So from the Israel-Lebanon border all the way up to the Litani River, Israel's methodically tried to reduce that threat. And I think they've done an excellent job at that. It's not 100% clear. However, they've done an excellent job through this campaign to position themselves for an effective ceasefire.
As far as the head of Hezbollah now, he actually said in a televised speech just yesterday that the terror group had, quote unquote, defeated Israel, saying, quote, "We won because we prevented the enemy from destroying Hezbollah." Is that likely, and I know this is kind of a tough question to answer, but is that likely to anger Netanyahu to hear something like that? You have a terror group saying, you know what, we have the ceasefire, and that means we defeated Israel.
Well, I think Netanyahu's kind of used to this bluster from Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations. So I think he's going to, I hope, take this with a grain of salt, because let me go back just a couple of months ago when Nasrallah was still alive. You know, Israel conducted a very effective and efficient campaign to remove a couple of key senior leaders and advisors to Nasrallah. So Nasrallah countered that with a significant rocket and missile barrage. However, it was completely ineffective. The same day, Nasrallah came out and said how extensive they damaged Israel, how successful that rocket campaign and missile campaign was, when it was a complete failure. So I think, taken in context, you know, Netanyahu's going to realize that this is what Hezbollah has to do. This is a kind of a Middle East mentality, Arab mentality, where they have to try to save face. And so those who follow that and don't look at the facts, they're going to, you know, they're going to realize that Hezbollah is doing nothing but bluster here. So I think it's going to be taken in the context of Qasem, who's the leader of Hezbollah right now, trying to save face, if you will. But everybody knowing the facts, no, this is not a win by any means. Not losing, you know, 4,000 fighters and thousands of your weapons and munitions. I don't really call that a win.
All right. Mark Chandler, as always, thank you so much for taking the time bright and early to join us and break down all those developments in the Middle East. I mean, we'd have to spend hours breaking down all of them. But anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Yeah, Josh, two things, if I could. You know, and not to be a downer about these ceasefires, but I just want your viewers to understand that any kind of ceasefire, whether it's with Hezbollah or with Hamas, is going to be relatively short-lived. I mean, Hezbollah, even though they're saying they won, they're purely trying to save face and save what's left of their infrastructure and their fighting capability. When they regenerate and Iran can get them resupplied, they're coming back. They will attack again. So that's something to keep in mind about these ceasefires in this turbulent and confusing Middle East situation. And adding to the confusion, I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Aleppo. It's a major city in northern Syria, but in the last 2 days, rebel groups opposed to the Syrian regime, and this civil war has been taking place for 13 years now, kind of retook the majority of Aleppo. That's the first time since 2016 that the Syrian regime has lost control of the Aleppo area. And to tell you how significant, you've seen both Iran and Russia conduct significant strikes against those rebel forces in Aleppo. And what this really seeing, and what a lot of people don't understand, is you've got Turkey, Russia, Iran, every Arab country out there, the United States, all at play in the Syrian civil war. And then you've got ISIS mixed in there. You could see the potential for an escalation that has nothing to do with what's taking place between Israel and Hezbollah and Hamas or Iran at this time. I think Israel's successful campaign against Hezbollah has taken out some of the Assad supporters and the Iranian ability to support Assad. And so these rebels took advantage of it to try to retake Aleppo at this time. So this is something to watch, and something that could lead to a different type of escalation in this turbulent area.
All right. Mark Chandler, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and have a good rest of your weekend.
Josh, thank you very much for having me, and you have a great weekend as well.
Thank you.